So we proceed to the statement by the Minister of State for Immigration, Robert Jenrick.
Well, with permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to make a statement on illegal migration. 3 months ago, my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, set out a comprehensive plan to tackle illegal migration. We said we would act, and we have. We've increased immigration enforcement visits to their highest levels in recent years. Since December, more than 3,500 enforcement visits have been carried out, and more than 4,000 people with no right to be here have been removed. Anglo-French cooperation is now closer than ever before and will be deepened because of the deal struck by the Prime Minister earlier this month. We've expanded our partnership with Rwanda to include the relocation of all those who pass through safe countries to make illegal and dangerous journeys to the United Kingdom. Our modern slavery reforms, introduced as part of the Nationality and Borders Act to prevent those who seek to abuse our generosity from doing so, are bearing fruit. We're tackling the backlog with our asylum system by cutting unnecessary paperwork and simplifying country guidance. As a result, productivity has increased, and we are on track to process the backlog of initial asylum decisions by the end of the year. Madam Deputy Speaker, we must ensure our laws enable us to deal with the global migration crisis, which is why we have brought forward the Illegal Migration Bill. The bill goes further than any previous immigration legislation to fix the problem of small boats, whilst remaining within the boundaries of our treaty obligations. And of course, as we reform the asylum system, we will continue to honour our country-specific and global safe and legal commitments. But we cannot and will not stop here, Madam Deputy Speaker, because illegal migration continues to impact the British public in their day-to-day lives. The sheer number of small boats have overwhelmed our asylum system and forced the government to place asylum seekers in hotels. These hotels take valuable assets from communities and place pressures on local public services. Seaside towns have lost tourist trade, weddings have been cancelled, and local councils have had their resources diverted to manage them. And the hard-working British taxpayer has been left to foot the eye-watering £2.3 billion a year bill. Madam Deputy Speaker, we must not elevate the well-being of illegal migrants above those of the British people. It is in their interests that we are sent here. The enduring solution to stop the boats is to take the actions outlined in our bill. But in the meantime, it is right that we act to correct the injustice of the current situation. I have heard time and again of councils up and down the country struggling to accommodate arrivals. This is no easy task. The government recognises that placing asylum seekers into local areas comes at a cost. And so central government will now provide further financial support. Today we're announcing a new funding package which includes generous additional per-bed payments and continuation of the funding for every new dispersal bed available. We will also pilot an additional incentive payment where those properties are made available faster. But faced with the scale of the challenge, we must fundamentally alter our posture towards those who seek to enter our country illegally. This government remains committed to meeting our legal obligations to those who would otherwise be destitute. But we're not prepared to go further. Accommodation for migrants should meet their essential living needs and nothing more, because we cannot risk becoming a magnet for the millions of people who are displaced and seeking better economic prospects. Many of our European partners are struggling with the same issue. Belgium, Ireland, Germany and France are having to take similar steps, and the UK must adapt to this changing context. I've said before that we have to suffuse our entire system with deterrence, and this must include how we house illegal migrants. So today the government is announcing the first tranche of sites we will set up to provide basic accommodation at scale. The government will use military sites being disposed of in Essex and Lincolnshire and a separate site in East Sussex. These will be scaled up over the coming months and will collectively provide accommodation to several thousand asylum seekers through repurposed barrack blocks and porter cabins. In addition, my right honourable friend the Prime Minister is showing leadership on this issue by bringing forward proposals to provide accommodation at Catterick Garrison Barracks in his constituency. And we're continuing to explore the possibility of accommodating migrants in vessels, as they are in Scotland and in the Netherlands. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to be clear. These sites on their own will not end the use of hotels overnight. But alongside local dispersal and other forms of accommodation, which we will bring forward in due course, they will relieve pressure on our communities, and they will manage asylum seekers in a more appropriate and cost-effective way. Of course, we recognise the concerns of local residents, and we're acutely aware of the need to minimise the impact of these sites on communities. Basic healthcare will be available, around-the-clock security will be provided on site, and our providers will work closely with local police and other partners. Funding will be provided to local authorities in which these sites are located. Madam Deputy Speaker, these sites are undoubtedly in the national interest. We have to deliver them if we're to stop the use of hotels. We have to deliver them to save the British public from spending eye-watering amounts accommodating illegal migrants. And we have to deliver them to prevent a pull factor for economic migrants on the continent taking hold. Madam Deputy Speaker, inaction is not an option. The British people rightly want us to tackle illegal migration. As I've set out today, we are doing exactly that, and I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Secretary of State Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, today's statement is an admission of failure. Maybe that's why the Home Secretary has asked the Immigration Minister to make it instead. 4 years ago, the Cabinet said they would halve channel crossings. They've gone up 20-fold since then. A year ago, they said they'd end hotel use. They've opened more than ever. They keep making new announcements, but it just keeps getting worse. And people want to see strong border security and properly managed asylum and refugee systems so that the UK does its bit to help those fleeing persecution and conflict alongside other countries. But we have got neither of those at the moment. There's no point in blaming everyone else because they are in charge. The asylum system is broken because they broke it. They have let criminal gangs rip along the channel. People smuggler convictions have halved in the last 4 years, even though more boats and more gangs have been crossing. And yet Tory MPs yesterday voted against Labour's plan for cross-border police units to go after the gangs. They've let asylum decision-making collapse. We've had a big increase in staff, but 40% fewer cases being decided. So they failed to take basic decisions, and they're still not doing Labour's plan to fast-track last year's arrivals from Albania and other safe countries. And as for today's announcements, Madam Deputy Speaker, we need to end costly and inappropriate hotel use, but these plans don't do that. The Minister's had to admit, contrary to all of the briefing in the papers this morning, they won't end hotel use. Instead, these sites are additional, and ministers should have been finding cheaper sites and properly managing costs years ago. Today's damning report from the government's own independent watchdog, which strangely the Minister did not mention today, says there's been no cost control, that the Home Office contracts are highly inefficient, no cross-government transparency and oversight, officials didn't have financial information on the contracts they were signing, didn't compare costs, and most ludicrously of all, and I quote, different parts of the Home Office operating different schemes, at times found themselves competing for the same hotel contracts, driving prices up. Totally chaotic. Basically, they've written a whole load of cheques in a panic. If they had put that money into clearing the backlog instead, we wouldn't be in this mess now. And they should have been working with councils to do this, but they didn't. Yesterday, Tory MPs again voted against Labour's plans for a legal requirement for councils to be consulted. Instead, he has Conservative councils backed by Conservative MPs taking action against him. So can he confirm that the Foreign Secretary is backing legal action against the Home Secretary? Frankly, that is a first even for this chaotic government. And the bill makes things worse. No return agreements with France or Europe. The Prime Minister has just said the Home Secretary was wrong. The Rwanda flights won't start this summer. They've nowhere to send people to, and instead of speeding up asylum decisions, they're just going to cancel them. So that means more people in asylum, accommodation and hotels, and more flim-flam headlines that just don't stack up. Today, it was barges, and it turns out there aren't any. Desperate to distract everyone from the damage they might want to do to the dambusters' heritage, instead they start talking about ferries and barges. 3 years ago they said the same thing. Last summer the Prime Minister said it would be cruise liners. The Home Office civil servant said ferries would end up costing more than the hotels they're already spending so much money on. So instead the Immigration Minister has been sent round the country with a copy of Waterways Weekly trying to find barges instead, and he still hasn't found any. So can he tell us, are these sites then going to be additional, not instead of hotel use? Will he still be using more hotels or less for asylum seekers in 6 months' time? Of the 45,000 people, the boat arrivals last year, can he confirm that more than 90% of decisions have not been taken because the backlog is still their failure? And will he apologise for their failure on cost control? They failed to support Labour's plan to go after the gangs, get a new agreement with France and to fast-track decisions and returns. They are flailing around in a panic, chasing headlines. Barges, oil rigs, Rwanda flights, even wave machines, instead of doing the hard graft. They have lost control of our border security, lost control of the asylum system, lost control of their budget and lost control of themselves. Will he answer my questions and will he get a grip?
Well, isn't it abundantly clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, that Labour don't have the faintest clue how to tackle this issue? They have absolutely no plan. What we've laid out today is 3 months of intense work, which is seeing the backlog coming down, productivity rising, more sustainable forms of accommodation, a harder approach to make it difficult to live and work in the UK illegally, illegal working raids and visits rising by 50%, greater control over the Channel, all improvements as a result of the 10-point plan that my right honourable friends, the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary, set out. The right honourable lady looks back to a mythical time when Labour were last in office, when the Home Office, by their own Home Secretary, was deemed to be not fit for purpose. They call for more safe and legal routes, even though we are second only to Sweden in Europe for resettlement schemes. They call for more money for law enforcement, although we've doubled the funding of the National Crime Agency, and our people are out there upstream tackling organised immigration criminals every day of the week. And isn't it extraordinary that the Home Secretary can't bring herself to the Shadow Home Secretary can't bring herself to condemn those illegal immigrants who are breaking into our country in flagrant breach of our laws. That is weak. That is weak. The truth is that the Labour Party are too weak to take the kind of tough decisions that we are taking today. And in their weakness, they would make the United Kingdom a magnet. There will be open doors, an open chequebook, and there will be open season for abuse. The British public know that the Conservative Party understand their legitimate concerns. We don't sneer at people for wanting basic border controls. We're taking the tough decisions. We will stop the boats. We will secure the borders.
Sir Edward Lee.
Although the Minister did not mention RAF Scampton by name, we assume that that is the base in Lincolnshire he is referring to. I can inform him that the moment this is confirmed, the local authority, West Lindsey, will issue an immediate judicial review and injunction against this thoroughly bad decision, which is not based on good governance, but the politics of trying to do something. How can he guarantee that we will not lose £300 million worth of regeneration already agreed and signed between West Lindsey and Scampton Holdings? How will he preserve the listed buildings, the Heritage Centre? How will he preserve this heritage of the Dam Busters and of the Red Arrows? How can he guarantee there's not contamination from the fuel bay of the Red Arrows? How will he protect the safety of 1,000 people living right next door to 1,500 migrants and a primary school? He can't guarantee anything. Will he work with West Lindsey now and Lincolnshire to try and find an alternative site? We are prepared to do it, but we do not want to lose £300 million of regeneration. Lincolnshire will fight, and Lincolnshire will be proved right.
Well, I can only pay tribute, Madam Deputy Speaker, to my right honourable friend and my friend and constituency neighbour. He is representing his constituents forcefully in the way he's always done in this place, and he's absolutely right to do so. I can say to him that whilst this policy is without question in the national interest, we understand the impact and the concern that there will be within local communities, and all parts of government want to work closely with him, with his local authorities, to mitigate the issues that will arise as a result of this site. I can say to him that there will be a significant package of support for his constituents. There will be specific protections for the unique heritage on the site. We don't intend to make any use of the historic buildings, and indeed in our temporary use of the site to ensure that those heritage assets are in fact enhanced and preserved. We do see this as a short-term arrangement, and we would like to enter into an agreement, as he knows, with West Lindsey District Council so that they can take possession of the site at a later date, and their regeneration plans, which are extremely important for Lincolnshire and the East Midlands more generally, can be realised in due course.
Alison Tunis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, Britain has historical form in the use of internment camps, and it is despicable that this government is intent on bringing them back in 2023. His pathetic attempt to draw comparisons between the use of cruise ships to accommodate Ukrainians is as offensive as it is misleading. And in fact, yesterday, the Ukrainian speaker, Ruslan Stefanchuk, thanked Scotland for saving the lives of his fellow citizens. Scotland is in fact standing down that emergency humanitarian response. Glasgow has closed and Edinburgh has an end date in sight. And furthermore, for those cruise ships, the Scottish Government provided wraparound support with local government, NHS, schools and community integration. His plan is a prison ship designed as a deterrent. Alex Wickham from Bloomberg reports that the Home Office rejected a similar plan last year, as it would be even more expensive than the eye-wateringly expensive hotels planned, costing hundreds of thousands of pounds per hour. What has changed since that advice last year? Headlines. Private providers are making a fortune out of this. He is now spending, scandalously, 1/3 of the UK's international aid budget on domestic asylum costs. So what impact has this raid on crucial aid had on the push factors bringing people to these shores? When this idea was previously proposed last year, ministers were also advised that security would be a nightmare, the project would be expensive and it would amount to arbitrary detention, a breach of the UN Refugee Convention. So what has changed than this advice was given last year? Does he understand that housing unaccompanied minors or traumatised people who have fled a war zone and military-style accommodation considered unfit for the MOD would be gravely inappropriate, and would he give assurances that such individuals would be exempt from such measures? Madam Deputy Speaker, the real problem here is the backlog. We all know that, and the Home Office's inability to tackle it. He knows that I've got constituents waiting 6 months, 10 months, 14 months, 18 months, 20 months and more for a decision from the Home Office. When will we stop wasting money on headlines and instead tackle the real crisis and fix the backlog?
Well, on her first, or one of her questions regarding the use of overseas development aid to pay for the accommodation of asylum seekers here in the UK, we entirely agree with her. I think it is a gross waste of taxpayers' money, and we want to see that money being put to better usage, and that's exactly why we need to stop the boats, so that the finite resources of the United Kingdom can be applied either to resettlement schemes, where we bring people from places of grave danger, like conflict zones, directly, or that we use our resources to support people in some of the most hard-pressed places in the world. That is obviously the best and moral way forward, rather than open borders for predominantly young men in a place of safety in France. With respect to vessels, as I said in my statement, we do see merits in using them. They have been used successfully in Scotland. It's surprising that the SNP seek to denigrate one of their own policies. They don't have very many successful policies, so when they have one, you'd think that they would want to, particularly when it comes to ferries, let's be honest, the SNP are on shaky ground. With respect to families, we don't intend to put minors or families on these sites, but they are the right way forward for single adult males. With respect to the backlog, we are making significant progress. And, well, we are actually. The Honourable Lady doesn't like to deal in facts, as we know. But I can give her our internal, unpublished as yet figures, which are that over 11,000 cases in the backlog have been processed in the last 3 months as a result of the new processes we've put in place. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, the broader point, as we all know with the SNP, is that they have become sort of humanitarian NIMBYs. She takes the kind of St. Augustine approach. Lord, let us welcome refugees, but not in our constituencies. She would have more credibility if she stood up and welcomed refugees and matched her fine words with good deeds.
No. We will just calm down before we go any further. Thank you. I expect better from over there. Priti Patel.
Deputy Speaker. If I may respectfully make a few points to my right honourable friend, the Minister, I think actually we need to tackle this entire debate and discussion with a degree of maturity, actually. This is a very, very difficult and sensitive subject. And if I may, the points that I would like to make very much refer to previous policy, new plan for immigration, Greek-style reception centres. Had we have had those in place, I think the Minister would recognise this, we would not be in this current situation. I would just like to ask the Minister, though, very specifically. I am an Essex MP and I'm the other MP for Braintree District. Wethersfield is not in my constituency, it's in the constituency of my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary. It is no different, if I may say so, in terms of the rurality and the village size, to a former site, not in Essex, which was Lincoln-on-Ouse, which was cancelled by the current government. Can I ask why it is deemed appropriate for asylum seeker accommodation to be placed in a rural village in Essex with single men, where there's no infrastructure, no amenities, but it was not appropriate for someone like Lincoln-on-Ouse?
Well, firstly, could I pay tribute to my right honourable friend, who began this good work with her new plan for immigration, which was an incredibly important step forward, and amongst other points, that recognised that it is absolutely critical that when individuals cross the Channel illegally, they are moved either to detained accommodation, which we want to bring forward as a result of our bill, or, in the absence of that, to specific sites where they can be housed appropriately, where their cases can be processed swiftly, and where they have minimal impact on broader society. I know that she pursued a very similar prospect in North Yorkshire, and she will have sympathy for the work that we've done in recent months to take forward similar proposals. I can say that we don't have a current plan to proceed with the Linton on News proposition, but the sites that I've announced today are just the first set that we'd like to take forward, because we want to remove people from hotels as quickly as possible and to move to this more rudimentary form of accommodation which will reduce pull factors to the UK and defend the interests of the taxpayer.
Alistair Carmichael.
Deputy Speaker, I think the House should be more generous to the Minister. We should acknowledge the true genius of this announcement. Only this Home Office team could think that the answer to the problem of growing numbers of people in small boats was to take them all together and put them into one big boat. Armando Iannucci himself couldn't improve on that. But if the Minister is confident in his projections about what is going to happen to the backlog of asylum applications, why is this extra capacity going to be necessary?
Well, to answer the second point first, what we want to see is anyone crossing the Channel moves into this kind of rudimentary accommodation immediately, and so it's absolutely critical that we build national capacity so that we can clear the hotels, consign that policy to the history books, and then people are put into these large sites. That's why we need them. I have affection for the right honourable gentleman, but I'm afraid he is being naive in this regard, because I am speaking every day, as is the Home Secretary, to our Northern European counterparts in Ireland, in Belgium, in Denmark, in France. They are all pursuing options like this because there is a European migration crisis. We have to ensure that the UK is not a magnet for those individuals who are either economic migrants or are essentially asylum shoppers. I will not allow the UK to be a soft touch.
Conor Burns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The determination of the Government to accelerate the processing of claims is to be welcomed. My right honourable friend, I think, would agree that it is unacceptable, wrong and immoral that people have their lives on hold, unable to make a new future for themselves or indeed to be returned to their countries of origin. Madam Deputy Speaker, we have a number of hotels in my Bournemouth West constituency full of such people who are constantly in touch with my hard-working casework team who want their cases resolved. So too, I say to my right honourable friend, do those involved in the hospitality and leisure sector in Bournemouth, on which our economy depend, and local residents who want to see those hotels brought back into the purpose of serving our thriving hospitality sector in Bournemouth. Can my right honourable friend give me the assurance that the proposals he is announcing today will bring into sight the day when those hotels will be returned to that purpose?
Well, my right honourable friend raises exactly the concerns that have motivated us to bring forward these proposals. We want to ensure that the interests of his constituency and constituents are put above those of illegal immigrants coming into our country. This is the necessary first step to build national capacity in these new forms of accommodation so that we can begin to close the hotels and move forwards.
Sir George Harth.
Can I thank the right honourable gentleman for the discussions he held recently with the leader, Chief Executive and myself of Knowsley Council to discuss the problem we have with a hotel in my constituency. He is aware that, in my view, the use of hotels is not fair on the taxpayer, it's not fair on local communities, and nor is it suitable for the refugees themselves. Will he, though, give me some indication of what criteria will be used to determine which hotels close and in what sequence?
Well, the conversations that I had with the right honourable gentleman and his local authority leaders informed the decisions that we've taken, because it was very clear from his constituency that that hotel was inflaming community tensions, that many people thought it was wrong that illegal migrants were being housed in a much regarded facility that was a hotel that was used for weddings and social events, and that we need to bring that to a close. When we have the capacity to begin closing hotels at pace, I think we'll do so through a number of lenses, obviously closing the most egregious cases first, where the cost to local communities is highest. Also those were in locations which were clearly unsuitable to begin with, such as seaside towns and so on. And then also those where the contracts are coming to an end and we wouldn't want to renew them for value for money purposes.
Richard Drax.
Deputy Speaker, land-based reception camps in the right place has to be the solution. Does my honourable friend agree with me that if you look at what happened in hotels so far with illegal migrants, we've had all kinds of issues with local residents, disappearing children, sexual assaults, etc., 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 etc. So would you agree with me that putting these people on boats or on barges, where the problem is going to be exacerbated tenfold, is totally and utterly out of the question?
Well, look, there are no easy answers. These are amongst the most difficult decisions within government. But I do think that placing asylum seekers on well-run, large sites with specific facilities provided, having minimal impact upon local communities, is the right approach. Taking hotels in a relatively ad hoc fashion in town centres, on high streets, is not the right way forwards. With respect to vessels such as barges or ferries, I do see merit in that. It is an approach that's been pursued in Scotland, but also, and in particular, I reference the Netherlands, which is using them effectively, and it does provide good value for money and decent accommodation.
Patrick Grady.
Deputy Speaker, the Big Help Out app encourages people to volunteer for a good cause over the coronation weekend, and a number of opportunities listed on it, including with the British Red Cross, are with organisations that help refugees and asylum seekers. So does he think it's appropriate that people spend the coronation weekend supporting people who he says have broken into this country?
Well, he and I may disagree on the fundamental point here, but I believe in borders. I believe in national security and national sovereignty, and those people who choose to enter our country in flagrant abuse of our laws, who in many cases throw their documents into the channel, those people are breaking the law, and it is right that we take action against them and, where possible, remove them from our country.
Marco Longi.
Madam Deputy Speaker, if I may quickly welcome her back to the chair. It's been a while. Will the Minister agree with me that whilst the Government accelerates assessment, enforcement and removal, that it is quite right that we look at suitable and sustainable accommodation for illegal immigrants? And will he also agree with me, therefore, that if armed force bases are suitable for our brave, they are certainly suitable for illegal immigrants?
Well, he's right to say that there is a peculiarity on the left of politics, that they seem to be happy to house our brave armed forces personnel on these sites, but not to see illegal immigrants temporarily housed there whilst we process their claims. Of course, we will always be motivated by decency and legality. These sites will be well run and appropriate, but we mustn't allow a further pull factor to the UK to emerge.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Right Honourable Gentleman told the House a little earlier that the three sites, which we presume are RAF Scampton, RAF Wethersfield and a site in East Sussex, perhaps he'd care to name it, will provide accommodation for several thousand. Could he tell the House how many thousand? And in doing so, could he remind us of the total number of people who are being placed in hotels currently?
Well, the number of individuals who will be housed on the sites will step up. Obviously, we want to ensure that the sites are well managed, and so initially there'll be smaller numbers, but within a very short period of time, there will be several thousand on those sites. I'm not going to give those details to the Right Honourable Gentleman now, because it's right that we engage with the local authorities and that they be the first to know the full details of our plans, but they will be a very significant addition to our capacity. The point he's making is that, in addition to that, there is a very large number of people currently accommodated in hotels. But this is the first step. This is the first step on the road to clearing those hotels and moving forwards. I would just say one further point, which is it's abundantly clear to me, having spent 4 months in this role now, there is no way in which I or the British government can build our way out of this issue. There are tens of thousands of people entering our country in an irregular manner every year. Of course, we have to get our own processes and management processes in place, but we've got to stop people coming here in the first place. That's why we're bringing forward the bill.
Maggie Throop. And I welcome today's update and commend my honourable friend for the efforts he's put in to get us to this stage. Further to the repeated assurance that I've previously received from the dispatch box from both my honourable friend and the Prime Minister, will the Minister now commit to publishing a clear timetable for the closure of the 2 migrant hotels within touching distance of each other in Erewash in weeks, not months? And will he guarantee that this will be the end of their use for such purposes?
Well, I know that the Right Honourable Lady, my honourable friend, has been very tenacious in campaigning on behalf of her constituents, who, as I said in my statement, more broadly, are extremely concerned about the impact these hotels are having and the loss of amenity in terms of business and tourism and social events. It's for that reason that we're taking this difficult but correct decision to produce these sites, and I hope that we'll start to see hotels coming to a close in the months ahead, and I'd be delighted to work with her as we do so.
Tamanjeet Singh Dassi.
Thank you very much. Madam Deputy Speaker, the British taxpayer is shelling out over £6 million a day to house migrants, but asylum decisions have collapsed by 40% since 2015. And that is what is to blame for the chaos with hotels. And furthermore, a damning watchdog report found that the Home Office didn't have the financial information to even test whether those contracts were value for money, and they didn't even follow the correct procedure as was laid out. So, Minister, after 13 years, is there anything that this government can manage to do properly?
Well, we all know what state the last Labour government left the Home Office in, and we only have to refer, as I did the other day, to the report of John Vine, who was the inspector at the time, which painted a picture of complete chaos and dysfunction at the Home Office when the party opposite were last in power. It is important that we get the backlog down, and I hope you can see from what I've said today that I have put in place a robust plan and that we have a high degree of confidence that we will succeed in getting it down over the course of this year. But the real issue is the number of people crossing the channel, the people smugglers, the human traffickers. If we clear the backlog, if we make it even faster to process people's claims, that won't stop people. That's not going to stop the boats. That's a fantasy. Stopping the boats requires tougher measures than that, like those set out in the illegal migration bill.
Ed Timpson.
Deputy Speaker, are there any circumstances in which my right honourable friend would envisage children being placed in any of the sites that he's announced today, and to ensure that they can be moved into local authority care as swiftly as possible, could I encourage him to use the additional funding which is welcome and been announced for councils to cope with this accommodation, that they have an incentive to make sure that that is available to children as a priority?
It's not my intention to house minors on these sites. It's right that we ensure that minors and families are properly supported. These sites are going to be used for single adult males and will act as a serious deterrent to those people coming to this country.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. These proposals are highly reminiscent of the internment camps for refugees in the BBC series The Years and Years, which was on during lockdown. And if you didn't see it, Madam Deputy Speaker, it was really about the decline of modern Britain, and it ended with the election of a fascist populist Prime Minister. Ukrainian refugees in Scotland have been temporarily accommodated in high-quality former ferry accommodation at Leith Docks, which is adjacent to my constituency, and I've visited it, and I suggest if the Minister were to visit it, he would see it's extremely different from the industrial barges he's proposing, but those were temporary accommodations. Does he appreciate that if the UK government dumps refugees from other countries into the sort of poor quality accommodation that he's describing, the United Kingdom may face a claim of racial discrimination under Article 14 of the ECHR?
Well, I refer the Honourable Lady to the comments I made earlier. As we know, the Scottish Government did use ferries. I pass no criticism of the Scottish Government for their choice of doing so, and it appears to have worked relatively successfully in the circumstances. And so I think it is an option worthy of consideration. With respect to meeting our domestic and international law obligations, of course we intend to do so, and any accommodation that we bring forward will be decent and legal.
Natalie Elphick.
Madam Deputy Speaker. My Conservative-led Dover District Council has been working really hard to provide affordable and other housing for local people. Kent County Council likewise for local services. But their excellent work is put under immense pressure in having to deal with the sheer numbers and volume of migrants within Kent. This has been supported by the Labour Party, who don't want to stop the small boats and who care more about channel migrants than they do about the residents of Dover and Deal and Kent as a whole. In spite of the pressures on services and on schools, we are being asked to do more and take more. And today's announcement will not ease those pressures on Kent in that regard. Will my right honourable friend meet with me and Kent colleagues to see what more can be done to ease the pressures, the immense pressures that are faced in Kent and particularly in Dover and Deal?
Well, I'd be pleased to meet my honourable friend and her colleagues once again. I'm acutely aware of the pressures faced by Kent and by local authorities in Kent. And not only will this policy reduce the dependence upon hotels, it will ensure that significantly increased funding is made available to local authorities such as hers, so that can alleviate some of the burdens they're facing.
Ruth Cadbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister knows that while asylum seekers are living in often very difficult conditions in the hotels, a large proportion of taxpayers' funding isn't even going to the hotels or the food providers, but is hemorrhaging out into the pockets of a network of often dodgy contractors and subcontractors. What's he doing to address this mismanagement of government funds?
I now meet very regularly with exactly those firms, our Home Office providers, and she can be assured, in fact I think I've said this to her privately, that I have been very clear with those companies that they have a job to do. We need them to find suitable accommodation, but the accommodation must be good quality, must meet our contractual terms, and there must be value for money. They've been left in absolutely no doubt of my views, and if she or any other member of this House have concerns or criticisms, they should bring them to me, and I will ensure that they are heard.
Kelly Tolhurst.
Deputy Speaker, and it is nice to see you back in your place. I do thank my right honourable friend for the hard work that he has shown. He's shown me the strength of the work that he's been doing over the months that he's been in the role to try and tackle the problem, and I very much encourage his determination to stop the boats. I'm very pleased to see that we have had more enforcement work, and also that the funding for local authorities is coming forward. This is something that is very key for any local authorities that are dealing with asylum seekers. But I would like to just touch on the dispersal accommodation element and really a plea that when the Home Office are making decisions around where to put dispersal accommodation, that where there are agencies who agree that a place is inappropriate, that the agencies who are put forward that information, the Home Office should really take note of that and look for alternative sites for those types of accommodation.
Well, my right honourable friend has been vociferous in raising legitimate concerns about one particular location in her constituency. She's right to say that there should be appropriate engagement between the local authority and the Home Office before any decisions are made, that the police and other stakeholders should be informed, and where there are serious concerns, of course, we shouldn't proceed with those properties.
Simon Malhotra.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister was right when he said we need to stop people coming here by boats. But last night, Labour voted for a cross-border police unit in the National Crime Agency to target criminal gangs smuggling people across the Channel. This is a measure that would make a huge difference in the short term and the long term to protecting our borders and the welfare of migrants. Why on earth did the government's MPs vote against it?
Because we've already done it.
Jane Stevenson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to pay tribute to my right honourable friend. I know him to be a compassionate, fair-minded minister, and he is having to take extremely difficult decisions in balancing helping people who are the most vulnerable and the interests of the people who elect us to represent them in this place, the UK taxpayer. Does he agree with me that the failure of parties opposite to recognise that during such a migration crisis there has to be a sensible limit on numbers, and the refusal to admit that resources are limited and UK taxpayers' money is limited makes them unfit for office?
Right. The Honourable Lady raised a very important and fundamental point that, of course, we want the United Kingdom to be a generous and compassionate country that is renowned across the world for the way in which we treat those seeking sanctuary. But we also have to appreciate the finite resources that we have, and we have to deploy them in the most effective manner. And I feel profoundly that we're sent here not to grandstand or to virtue signal, but to put the well-being and interests of our own constituents first.
Clive Betts.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister's made vague statements about all asylum seekers being moved out of hotels. He hasn't got a plan how to do it, has he? The only fallback, as the Security Minister, well, let's see it. The only fallback which the Security Minister announced yesterday is to pass responsibility back to local authorities. Did he see the response from the Local Government Association yesterday to that plan, where they said that most councils have got no social housing to offer? In most areas, the local housing allowance isn't sufficient to pay for the cost of accommodation. So what does he expect local authorities to do when thousands of asylum seekers are simply passed back to them from the hotels they're currently in?
Pity that the honourable gentleman always campaigns against the building of new homes. That might have been the easiest way to fix the housing crisis. But what we're going to do is work carefully and productively with local authorities to address this issue. That's always been my approach. When I was local government secretary, I engaged constantly, religiously with local authority leaders, and we're continuing to do so. What we're going to do is provide significantly enhanced resources to them so that we better meet the true costs of handling this difficult challenge.
Tom Hunt.
Speaker, clearly basic and cheap accommodation is far better than four-star hotels at the heart of communities to accommodate those who have illegally entered our country. The Minister will know how strongly I feel about the Nova Hotel in Ipswich, and also the fact that the vast majority of my constituents are against it. It's interesting that the Labour Party today has said they oppose use of hotel accommodation, because only recently we had a protest in favour of use of a hotel, which was attended by the Labour Parliamentary candidate and half the local Labour Party. So that's quite interesting. Will the Minister be able to give me some timescales with regards to when we can move out those who are currently in hotels into more appropriate accommodation? Because the sooner we get them out of a Nova Hotel, the better, and the more support he'll get from our constituents.
Well, I share his desire to close that hotel as soon as possible. I know how hard he's been representing his constituents in this regard. Today is the critical first step. Once we have these sites up and running, a combination of new arrivals and those currently in hotels will be moved on to the sites. The backlog clearance will, of course, free up places in hotels and enable us to close those. But the fundamental point is that the only sustainable answer is to stop the boats in the first place.
Stuart MacDonald.
Madam Speaker, can I ask what assessment the Department has made of the increased risk of self-harm and indeed suicide amongst vulnerable asylum seekers placed in precisely the type of institutional accommodation that he is advocating for today? Has a risk assessment been done of this policy, perhaps even one that MPs are allowed to see? Hear, hear.
Well, of course, we take the well-being of the illegal immigrants, the residents of these new sites, seriously. I think that they will be better cared for in this bespoke accommodation than in a network of ad hoc hotels taken in emergency circumstances. These sites will have well-trained individuals running them, they'll have their own healthcare facilities, and we'll be able to have Home Office personnel on site processing their claims swiftly, so they can either be granted asylum and remain in the UK, begin paying taxes, making a contribution to our country, or be removed.
Dr. Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his update and for his hard work in this area? Can my right honourable friend reassure this House that the treatment of women, children and families throughout this whole process will be compassionate, and that throughout the entire process that this Conservative government is committed to supporting and bolstering safe and legal routes to help vulnerable people fleeing persecution and seeking sanctuary?
Firstly, he has my total assurance that whilst this policy is tough, it will also be decent and legal, and he can see the work that I did in the autumn in the reforms to the Manston site in Kent as evidence of the way in which I will approach this. But to his second point, absolutely, this government believes in the UK being a world leader for resettlement schemes and safe and legal routes, which we are already. 500,000 people have come to our country for humanitarian purposes since 2015. That's something we should be proud of, and it's something that a Conservative government will continue.
Tim Farron.
Madam Deputy Speaker, he referenced and misquoted St Augustine of Hippo earlier on, who was from North Africa, and he would have put him in a camp as a consequence. He talked also in his statement about fundamentally altering our posture. I wonder if the Minister might consider altering his posture to being one of someone who is good at his job. Because in the end, what we have got is asylum seekers in hotels who do not want to be in hotels, but are in hotels and hostels. Why? Because of the colossal backlog that this government is responsible for. Rather than wasting money on this gimmick today, which clearly many of his backbenchers disagree with for a variety of different reasons, why does he not invest in making sure that those appeals are heard quickly, those hearings are done quickly, so people can either be given the right to remain or be removed, as his government is failing to do? Would he agree with me that there is one thing worse than his and his government's incompetence on this issue, and it is the blaming of the consequences of that incompetence on the most vulnerable people in the world?
Well, I fundamentally disagree with the right honourable gentleman. Fault here lies with the people smugglers and the human traffickers. We should never blame ourselves in this country for the actions of organised immigration criminals. That is completely wrong. We are taking robust action to stop the boat, to arrest the trade, which is bringing tens of thousands of people illegally into our country and putting people's lives on the line every day. He doesn't want that. Of course he doesn't. That's why he should support our bill and help us to stop the boats.
Jack Burton.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as the Minister knows, Stoke-on-Trent has contributed significantly to accommodating both asylum seekers and refugees, and the announcements today of additional funding for local areas will be very welcome to help cope with some of those pressures. But my constituents in Stoke-on-Trent want to know, will the Minister be prioritising emptying those hotels in Stoke-on-Trent?
That Stoke-on-Trent has stepped up and has provided a significant amount of accommodation, and that is creating challenges for the city. It's been my pleasure to work with him and the excellent leader of Stoke-on-Trent City Council. We want to ensure that hotels that are the most egregious cases are closed the first, and I think in particular of the North Staths Hotel in the centre of Stoke. That is exactly the sort of important business asset that I'd like to see closed swiftly.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. In the past few weeks, asylum seekers have been placed in hotels in my constituency that the Home Office then deemed unfit for occupation and dispersed them to undisclosed locations at no notice. Children have been taken out of school in the middle of exams, and last night, I'm told, asylum seekers were dumped outside a hotel in Shepherd's Bush and told to share rooms and beds with complete strangers. Is it the government's policy to punish and humiliate asylum seekers in these ways as a means of discouraging further migrants, even though, on past experience, the majority are likely to be granted status in the UK?
We will always treat people with decency and compassion, but it's also correct that we have to address the very significant pull factor to the United Kingdom. This is an approach being followed by most of our North European neighbours, like the Belgians, the Dutch, the Danes, the French and the Irish, because the pressures are so great. He doesn't want to stop the boats. He doesn't back our bill, or indeed any prior measures. We want to. We'll take the steps that are necessary.
Selene Saxby.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And can I take the opportunity to thank my right honourable friend for all of his work in this area, because I think most of us recognise this is a multifaceted problem and there is no silver bullet solution. Can I ask, does today's announcement mean that there will not be further requests by contractors to find hotel accommodation or similar, as I am aware of challenging conversations in my own constituency at this time? And where we are looking to empty hotels, we have a community that's very willing to welcome people into their homes, but might we look towards a scheme the same as we did when welcoming Ukrainian refugees, where there is additional ministerial resource, not disrespectful of his own experience in this matter, so that we can actually bridge that gap with the Levelling Up department, because we have a housing crisis of our own. We have thousands of our own population unable to secure accommodation, but we are keen to work to find a solution, and might there be an opportunity to sort of bridge the housing and the immigration situation?
Well, we are trying to work as closely as possible, the Home Office and the Department for Levelling Up. My honourable friend, the member for Kensington, is working closely with us on the operation of schemes like Homes for Ukraine, the Ukraine Family Scheme, the Afghan schemes, Syria and so on. That's very important. We also have officials who are working jointly between the two departments. So I hope that she will see that all of government is working closely together to address this complex, multifaceted challenge.
Clyde Efford.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Minister has told us that newly arrived migrants are going to be taken to this new form of accommodation. So they are going to be competing for places with people he wants to move out of hotels. And it seems to me that he's planning for the failure of his illegal attempts through legislation to stop boats, because he is increasing the capacity of the spaces that he is planning. So can he tell us, in addition to those that are already accommodated by the Home Office, how many more people is he planning to accommodate?
Well, I'm confused by his question. He doesn't support the bill in the first place, but it is our intention that once we have secured the passage of our bill through Parliament, I thought the committee stage over the last 2 days showed the strength of support on this side of the House, not quite the same reaction on the other side, but we're going to bring forward the Rwanda proposal. Once that is operationalised, people will be detained, their cases will be heard in a limited fashion, and then they'll be removed from the country swiftly. In the meantime, we need some capacity, and that's going to be provided by these new large sites.
Mr Ragg.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. My right honourable friend is one of the abler ministers in the Home Office, so it makes sense for him to give this statement this afternoon. Is he, though, as concerned as I am with a Gerald Ratner approach to the government's immigration policy, whereby it simply spends its time highlighting the problems rather than some of the work it is undertaking? Is he aware that the primary concern of most people is to ensure that the backlog of asylum applications is dealt with at a pace at which, and decisions more importantly, as they were in 2015? Could I also caution him that even worse than a Gerald Ratner approach to government policy on this is a something must seem to be done policy, which might bring forward this Rosie and Jim idea of barges all over the place?
Well, my honourable friend raises an important point, that I think the public do not want to see performative or declaratory policies in this space. They want to see us acting, taking difficult decisions, and that is what is within this statement. He's also correct to say that this requires an approach across many different avenues, and he can see that again in the fact that we are rapidly reducing the backlog, that we've increased immigration enforcement visits by 50%, that we've established the small boats operational command in the Channel and are recruiting hundreds of officers to staff that we've signed deals with France, Albania. This shows the government acting on every approach. He can be in no doubt we will solve this problem, and if we fail, it will not be for want of trying.
Mr Farry.
Thank you. The Minister talked about only meeting the basic needs of the residents. However, mental health to many people is a basic need. I don't see how isolation is going to help in that particular regard. Following on from that, can I invite the Minister to join me in condemning the racist protesters that are appearing outside hotels, including one in my own constituency, and in particular invite him to directly challenge the tropes that are being used that asylum seekers are sexual predators, the same tactic that has been used down through the centuries to attack marginalised people?
It's been very clear that those far-right and other elements who are inciting violence and intimidation outside hotels or other forms of accommodation are wrong. I have directed the Home Office to work closely with the police through the National Police Coordination Centre and other parts of government, including the security services, to track that pernicious activity and to support local councils and police forces in taking robust action wherever possible. If he has particular cases he wants to bring to my attention, I'd be pleased to look into them.
Jackie Doyle-Price.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I just probe my right friend with regard to his proposals for housing migrants in barges and ferries? And specifically, could he just advise whether he expects those vessels to be to have access to the quay or moored offshore? And if they are to have access to the quay, which I'd expect, what conversations he's had with port operators about the operational challenges to their business for hosting what is essentially a residential community long term?
Well, my honourable friend will forgive me. I'm not going to comment on press speculation. I will obviously make further statements should we proceed with any significant developments in this regard. I have pointed to examples in Scotland and in the Netherlands where the use of vessels has been successful. We don't, as she knows, currently have the powers to detain individuals for prolonged periods of time, and so any form of accommodation would be non-detained.
Paul Blomfield.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. In response to an earlier question, the Minister talked about people breaking into our country. The Home Secretary has talked about an invasion. Words which, I guess, like this statement, are designed for the headlines. But can I ask him quite genuinely whether he doesn't recognise that this sort of language to describe people, many of whom are seeking refuge from countries like Afghanistan, Iran and Syria, whether such language is inflammatory, divisive, adding to the sort of tensions other members have talked about, and whether he wouldn't reflect on his use of language and agree that the priority is to tackle the people smugglers, not criminalise and demonise their victims.
Well, I believe that all of us have a responsibility to choose our words with care and to accept the occasions where we choose the wrong language. This is an area of public policy which it would be better to de-escalate the current language and tensions. I don't think that it's wrong to describe individuals as illegal immigrants or to say that individuals are breaking into our country, because we have borders and they have to be enforced. If you or I crossed a national border into another country, you would expect to be met by law enforcement and a robust response.
Mark Jenkinson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I pay tribute to the work of my right honourable friend on this matter and that of the Home Secretary and the former Home Secretary. The diligence and cooperation of each of them with me has been welcome over the last 12 months. Last summer I successfully managed to stop the introduction of a hotel in my constituency of Workington in a wholly unsuitable place, although it fell on me, unfortunately, to prove to the Home Office that it was wholly unsuitable. The threat of additional hotels, not only of hotels, but of companies like Serco hoovering up family homes while we have a housing waiting list in my constituency remains. Can my right honourable friend set out to me what today's announcement means for that threat and when we can safely say that threat might have been removed?
Well, first, I thank him for his generous words towards me and my colleagues at the Home Office. He's right to say that the sheer number of people crossing the Channel illegally, coupled with the generosity of our country in recent years in welcoming in 500,000 people on humanitarian grounds, and the high levels of legal migration we have, are posing a very serious challenge to communities and councils with respect to housing and social housing. We're working with the Department for Levelling Up through those challenges, and one additional element that we're introducing today is a substantially enhanced package for local authorities so they have more funding to pay for the kinds of accommodation that they'll need and any displacement activity that might occur.
Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Rather than treat those seeking sanctuary in these shores as criminals and waste vast sums of money to build internment camps to house them, wouldn't it be more sensible simply to issue them with temporary work permits so that they can contribute to the community, earn their own money to cover their own housing costs and pay tax into the exchequer rather than being a drain upon it?
Exactly. Here. I understand and acknowledge that that's a legitimate point of view. It's not one that I agree with, because I believe that we have to suffuse our approach with deterrence, and if we allow a further pull factor to the United Kingdom in the form of enabling people to work soon after their arrival, I suspect we will just find even more people coming to this country.
Jonathan Gallis.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I want to first of all thank my right honourable friend, the Minister, for his engagement, which has been quite robust between us at times, because he'll understand that in Stoke-on-Trent, where we have around 1,300 asylum seekers and illegal economic migrants, of which 31% are in hotels, residents and constituents are outraged to see the city used and abused in this way. And he wholly and accurately reflects the North Stafford Hotel, right by a levelling up project, right by a £40 million Transforming Cities Fund, right opposite our railway station, which is a gateway to 6 million visitors a year, as being wholly unacceptable. So to seek reconfirmation, Mr Deputy Speaker, from my own friend, who in answer to my friend and neighbour in Stoke-on-Trent South, that Stoke-on-Trent will be one of those priority areas that will see these young single men moved out of hotels into the new accommodation he has outlined today.
Well, as my honourable friend knows, I love the Potteries and will always want to further the best interests of Stoke-on-Trent and its wider region. The hotel by the station is a particularly egregious one, in my opinion, because it is holding back regeneration in that part of the city, and I would like to see it closed at the earliest opportunity. The other point I'd make with regard to Stoke-on-Trent is that it has stepped up and taken a very large number of individuals through dispersal accommodation, which I hope other local authorities will do with the added support we're providing today.
Simon Lightwood.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Yesterday, Labour offered a reasonable amendment to the illegal migration bill, which would have forced the Home Office to consult with councils over asylum hotels. That would have been welcome in my constituency, where, despite the Minister's announcements, it's planning to force a third hotel on my community. Wakefield Council has already had £300 million cut from its budget and has done its best to provide support, but it lacks the community capacity and, yes, the funding to do more. So why did the government run scared last night and vote down our amendment to give local councils a say?
Well, he should go back to his constituents and explain why, in his short tenure in this House, he has already started voting against exactly the kind of measures which would stop the boats. I rather suspect that he's not on the same side as his constituents on this issue.
Foster.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. It has to be said, today's statement is one that, I can understand the Minister's trepidation in coming into the dispatch box, having had to do similar statements myself over the years. But it is the right approach that he's outlining today. We can see comparisons, particularly on continental Europe, particularly in Greece, where large-scale accommodation centres are being used as part of a transformation of their asylum system, providing humane and decent accommodation, whilst also actually assisting with the process of making decisions. Now, in terms of dealing with some of the issues we've had thrown at this, one, I'm assuming he will view this as a part of national infrastructure and therefore take that through that planning process. And the second part of this, I also presume this is all, as he's touched on already, non-detained accommodation. And then finally, what sort of timeline is he looking to actually get some of these centres up and running? Because people will only really see this making a difference when they see hotels closing down in their local area.
Well, my honourable friend knows how difficult these decisions can be. And like him, as my predecessor, I didn't come into politics to deal with clandestine entry or organised immigration crime, but I did go into politics to provide security and stability to the public and to put the interests of my constituents above those of anyone else. And that's why we're taking these decisions in the national interest. We will ensure these sites are non-detained, they're legally compliant, they'll be provided at pace. We will make use of the planning powers that the government has at its disposal, and I'm confident that we will be able to get individuals on these sites in the coming weeks.
To hear Ali.
Mr Deputy Speaker, 13 years of Tory mismanagement, asylum system in crisis, backlogs out of control, claims not being decided for years on end. This statement does nothing but bring a scaremongering and headline grabbing just before the local elections. A member of his own party summarised this statement quite correctly as politics of trying to do something. Politics of trying to do something. Will he agree with me that this statement, which is no more than headline-grabbing scaremongering, does very little to target human traffickers and the illegal grants, but rather it makes illegal traffickers the heroes, whilst the victims are the real targets in this?
Well, it sounds like better than the politics of doing nothing, which is what the opposition is proposing. We are taking action to tackle the people smugglers and the human traffickers, and I don't doubt the motivations of the honourable gentleman, but let me say this. I see these people and the work that they do every day in this job. They are some of the most evil, the most pernicious people in society. You have to match them. You cannot behave in a way which is weak and naive. You have to respond. You have to respond with tough policies, and that's what we're doing here. We will not allow the UK to be a soft touch, and by ensuring that we now have this new form of accommodation, not only will we clear the hotels, but we'll also ensure that there isn't a pull factor to the UK.
Mr Baines.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I warmly welcome my right honourable friend's statement this afternoon, and I'd also like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to the right honourable lady, the member for Witham, for her excellent work as Home Secretary previously. Could my right honourable friend comment in more detail on the similar approach that's been taken to asylum accommodation by Belgium, Ireland, France, Germany, and it would seem by the Scottish Government as well?
It is true, as I've said on a number of occasions, that our Northern European neighbours are looking to take similar robust approaches. In Ireland, they are considering bailing individuals to no fixed abode with vouchers to pay for their immediate needs, as I understand it. In Belgium, they have seen tented communities arise, and they're using hostels akin to homeless shelters. The Danes have, I think, publicly said that my right honourable friend's policy with respect to Rwanda is an interesting and valuable one which they are looking on with interest. And so we're not alone, we're not unique, we're working together because there is a European migration crisis, and we have to take serious and robust decisions, make difficult choices, or I'm afraid the UK will be very exposed.
Jim Shannon.
Mr Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Minister for his statement today? The Minister knows there is a difference between economic migrants who are abusing the system and are fit and independent and whose circumstances have dictated the final report, but alongside there are those who are asylum seekers, many fleeing religious persecution, be it women, children, families who need help urgently. So can I ask the Minister this question? Will he make it abundantly clear that those who come here illegally due to extenuating circumstances will have scope for compassion in their treatment?
Well, we want to ensure that human dignity is at the heart of the system that we are creating. And that's why the UK has a fantastic record in recent years for resettlement schemes of the kind that I know that the honourable gentleman is a champion, like those from Ukraine, Hong Kong, Syria, Afghanistan. And by bringing an end to illegal migration across the Channel, or reducing it as far as one can, we can deploy our finite resources as a country to help those people who need it the most, those people who are in conflict zones, the victims of religious persecution that he cares passionately about, rather than those people who are predominantly young men who are fit, able and in a safe place like France.
Can I thank, in a moment, can I thank the Minister for his statement and responding to questions for well over an hour, but could I just ask him to remain seated for the first point of order, which I think directly relates to something that he may have said. So, Mr. Betts.
Point of order. With regard to the Minister's response to the question I asked him, where he said, I'd always opposed house building. I think the Minister knows, in this House, as Chair of the Select Committee as well as individually, I've argued very strongly for more house building, including hitting the 300,000 target. Only this week I've been working with officers in Sheffield to try and get away a scheme to build 800 homes at Attercliffe Wardside in my constituency. I've worked on it for many years. I've known in the past the Minister to be a fair and reasonable man, even when I've disagreed with him. Wouldn't he, on reflection, accept that what he said was unfair and inaccurate, and maybe like to correct the record?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I've worked alongside the Honourable Gentleman for some time and know him to be an excellent chair of the Select Committee, so I mean him no disrespect. He and I did disagree on reforms of the planning system, including building more homes in Sheffield, but I know that he is a champion of good quality housing and increasing the quantity of it across the country.